Hi there, Church of Nowhere, here again. Animal rights and the human good. Now, I'm not going to go into the supposed health benefits of a vegan lifestyle because that's so much a matter of medical opinion, and people are individuals anyway. So it's hard to generalize about the benefits of any lifestyle, really. If it benefits you, then through trial and error, then that's great. But whether you can extrapolate to the population in general, I don't know. And to the population of the Earth in general, I don't know. Because there are slight physiological differences between peoples of different cultures, I think. It's very slight, anyway. Um, Depends on what you're used to, what your body's used to every day. But no doubt we can change, and therefore lifestyles can change, and therefore the body can adapt physiologically to changes in diet, which it has done for the last many thousands of years. But I'm not going to go into that. Neither am I going to go into the whole animal rights issue following somebody like Peter Singer, because that's all been done before, and there's probably a million, well, 1,000 videos on YouTube about on the subject of animal rights, both from a sort of emotive standpoint and a philosophical standpoint, which is objective and dull and boring and not at all fun. Anyway, unless you like that kind of thing, of course, which I do immensely. But anyway, the thing about it is that, I was thinking about in connect with this animal rights in connection with silicon sex dolls. I'm a lateral thinker, see. Anyway, on the one hand, you have these silicon sex dolls that are becoming more realistic every year with every new model. And they've even got they've got children sex dolls, right, which we won't go into at all on this in this video. But they've also got adult sex dolls, and they've got these dolls which bruise when you hit them. That sounds mightily sick to me. Anyway, unless we're going to get some, and of course this opens up the debate, you see, between whether there's such a thing as catharsis, positive catharsis, or is it just a matter of negatively feeding your obsession with violence and anger towards women and children, for that matter? So anyway, you've got these sex dolls on one hand, which are very realistic and which bruise when you hit them, and on the other, there's this kind of unwritten law of amongst people that own sex dolls, that you should treat your sex doll in the same way as you treat your wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, because there are also male sex dolls, of course, not so many of them, but some. And you shouldn't do things to your sex doll that you couldn't do to your or wouldn't do to your actual flesh and blood partner, if you had one, or if you did have one, if it's like talking in the in the conditional sense, like if you did have a girlfriend or wife, would you treat her like that? Would you torture her and beat her and bruise her and hit her and do all the hundreds of other things that you can do with a silicon sex doll? And against this, of course, people will say, well, it's just a silicon sex doll, isn't it? So I mean, why can't you do all those things to a silicon sex doll? It's got no brain, it's got no soul, it's got no feelings, it's just an object of steel and silicon and and I don't know, it's plastic or whatever. Um, so get on with it and just beat it up and torture it and whatever. It's just an it. And yet, I think that people, because they are very realistic looking nowadays, there is a feeling that makes it's not good for you. It's not somehow good for the person that owns the sex doll to do those things violent and humiliating and demeaning things to the sex doll, there's some kind of like it's sort of feeling that this isn't right somehow, and that would be sick. You know, that would be feeding your violence, feeding your violent thoughts against women. But apart from that issue of actual feeding negative thoughts against catharsis, again, you know, which are supposed to somehow get rid of those negative thoughts, or at least bring you into a state of integration with those thoughts. That you know that it's bad to torture people on one hand, but it feels good to torture them on the other, and somehow you've got to integrate these two. But apparently the latest psychological research shows that catharsis doesn't actually work. That you end up actually feeding violent, negative thoughts towards women and children, even if you role play on some virtual world or have a silicon sex doll, adult or child. That this isn't a good idea. You build up hardwired patterns in the brain, which eventually are going to spill out into the real world. So that's kind of the latest thing, which would seem to support the fact that it isn't a good idea. Pornography, filling your life with pornography, sex dolls, masturbators, pixel sex on some virtual worlds isn't a good idea after all. That was the idea in the 60s, and now it's been pretty much disproved by psychological research. So that's kind of interesting itself. So basically, all these things, as I say, the sex doll doesn't feel anything. You know, it has no rights, does it? I mean, how can a sex doll have any rights? I mean, if we're talking about robots, on the other hand, with AI, then perhaps robots with AI do have rights, but we're not at that stage yet. We've only got these inanimate objects at the moment, so they don't have any rights, and yet there's a prohibition against doing things to the sex doll that you wouldn't do to a real person. And this brings me on to the fact that, perhaps when people started punching these sex dolls or beating them or I don't know, torturing them or putting their cigarettes out on them or something, the initial reaction was yuck. This is gross. This is sick. I'm a sick person doing this. And then after that you sort of justified it. You played a lot of mental games with yourself, and you say, oh well, I'm doing it for a higher purpose and to integrate my dark side with my light side and all this, and you build up a whole layers and layers and layers of justification around your initial reaction, which was one of disgust and guilt. But perhaps that initial reaction is in fact the right one. And in the center of all of us, everybody, there is a sort of kernel, or what one might call a sort of soul or core of morality, which actually doesn't want to fight wars or torture animals or torture other people. Its initial reaction is one of disgust. I mean, for example, you know about cochineal, which is a red dye that's added to biscuits and other things like that. Well, this is derived from a beetle, which you've got to crush, presumably while it's still alive. It doesn't really matter, from which you extract this red dye. Well, presumably you have to crush a lot of these little beetles in order to get this dye. Now, you can imagine the person starting work on a Monday morning having to crush all these beetles, right? And their first initial reaction, the reaction from their soul, their core, will be run, oh, this is gross, this is a bit disgusting. But then it would be quickly followed by the other thought, well, it's only a beetle, isn't it? And I've got to find a job, otherwise they'll cut me off from welfare. And there aren't any jobs around in this area, so it's the only job I could actually get. And I'm glad I'm lucky to have this job, so I should grit my teeth and do it. And it is only a beetle, isn't it? Oh, come on, like and after you've squashed several thousand of these creatures, you can go on squashing them because you built these layers of of necessary evil or justification around your gut reaction, but the gut reaction was the right one. And you shouldn't eat biscuits which have cochineal added to them, right? Which and if everybody did that, then obviously the cochineal making factory would go out of business eventually, because there wouldn't be any demand for cochineal, or at least cochineal made from the real thing, which is these little beetles, right? Um, You'd have to find your red dye for your biscuits somewhere else, or not have a red dye in them at all. Anyway, and you may say, well, they are just little beetles, really. But I mean, if you imagine a beetle will go away from a source of danger, and towards a source of food or towards a mate in order to mate with it. So it'll try and avoid forces of destruction and go towards forces of creation, which is mating with another female beetle, I suppose, and going towards a source of food in order to feed itself, in order to make its engine carry on, as it were. And this seems to me to be like a basic algorithm of existential awareness, because I am alive. I'm a beetle, and I'm living. I'm a living beetle, and I want to mate, and I want to feed, and I want to avoid being squashed, and I want to avoid being eaten by another predator. I want to be avoid being cooked or be frozen in some way. So I'm avoiding all negative things and I'm going towards positive things. So this would, so the initial reaction of somebody squashing one of these beetles, which is one of, that's gross or yuck, even however fleetingly that thought might come into your brain, quickly followed by well, it's necessary evil, or I've got to get a job somewhere, or it's only a beetle, quickly followed by the justification thoughts. It might be that your initial reaction, is the one that makes you a human being, whereas the other thoughts that justify your action make you into a corporate clone, a corporate drone, even. And you're just working for the corporation that owns the company, that owns the factory that makes the cochineal, right? So you might want to think about that and might want to liberate yourself from being a corporate drone and being a sheeple, and saying to yourself, well, is it right? Is it fair to squash up a beetle for its dye, for its red colour, for its colour red? Is it right to do that? And then you might say, well, it might be all right for doing a beetle, or it might not be all right to squash a beetle. In which case, if it's not all right to squash a beetle, then I can't kill a cow. I can't be part of the meat industry. I can't be part of the cow dairy industry. I can't be killing. I can't be part of the mutton industry, sheep rearing industry, and so on and so forth. And since you're worried about, the little cochineal beetle, then it might be that you end up worrying about whales and dolphins and cattle and sheep and goats and even lobsters and crabs and things like that. So you end up saying, well, the only way out of this is to become a vegan, or eat vegan food. At any rate, this towards principle. I'm going towards a lifestyle of veganism, but I'm not there yet. Like, you know what I mean? I mean, be nice to yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just go towards this goal of a vegan lifestyle or whatever, and persuade other people to join you in that enterprise, if they want to. And basically, as I say, if people care about this little beetle, begin to care about beetles, and they've already been kind of told that you should care about an inanimate object like a sex doll. And basically, what I'm saying is, you see, that never mind about the beetle, never mind about the cattle, never mind about the sex doll. I mean, if they're dead, they're dead, right? There it is, like, but it's all about you. It's all about this core of morality, that you have natural ethics, which your soul, if you like to call it that, your soul has this core revulsion against causing harm, and a desire to not cause harm, and that's the right one. That's the one that you should and could develop, and could cultivate, and could base your lifestyle on. You see, um, and this being so, animal rights is really almost neither here nor there. It's not about the animals in a way, because maybe the animal's already dead and already a leather pair of leather shoes, right? It's about you. It's about the people that make you the leather shoes, or the people that stick a piece of rod, a steel rod, into the belly of a pig, to stick a pig in order to make you your burgers, and your bacon sarnies, So it's those people you've got to worry about. What's the effect on them? And then, because you're part of that industry, you are facilitating perhaps the slow death of their own soul. And or maybe you just think, oh, well, it doesn't, we'll get over it. Get over yourself, like, it doesn't really matter about morality. Uh, animals are just energy. Silicon sex dolls are just energy. Children are just energy. Whatever you do, what you do, and then you might come back to me and say, "Oh, well, you're thinking black and white, and of course there's got to be a line in the sand, so we don't harm children, human children, right? So there's the line there. You don't cross that line. But hey, everything else is all right. Everything else is just energy. But then, well, why? I mean, why are human children, so protected by some kind of moral value, and everything else isn't? Either everything has the same moral value, or nothing has any moral value. In which case, I can do anything I like to anybody, right? And so I don't know. I mean, there's probably a philosophical flaw in my argument, but on the emotive level, I almost think it's good to cultivate one's emotions that have such a core, such a core basis. And when you start to meditate on your core feelings, you might begin to think that those feelings actually count for more value, than your feelings of necessary evil, or feelings about things having to be so, or I've got to be like that, or the world's got to be like that, and they could be emotions which have much less value. So whether or not something is philosophically true or not, you still have the emotions at your core level, which you've had to suffocate over the years in order to carry out the actions which your core self doesn't like or reacts against. And maybe you should take notice of the child within that doesn't want to cause harm. But then, as I say, well, a lot of children do want to cause harm. I mean, children step on worms and things like that, or hit each other in the playground or whatever. Just naturally, they're naturally horrible, sort of thing. And so that, I suppose, that's not much of an argument at all. But then you see, maybe by the time they've got to the playground, or by the time they've got to the position where they can just step on a snail and not worry about it, they've already suppressed that core emotion with which they were born, which was naturally not to go to war and not to harm things. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I just thought I'd leave you to search within yourself, to maybe look at this core being, and then perhaps, if you find this core being, to change your life accordingly.